Her only clear impression resolved itself into a scared sense of his power. "You're wondering how I found out about him?" he went on. "I'm the owner of the Benedict, but never mind about that now. Let's look at the situation straight. Mrs. Dorset did you a beastly bad turn last spring. Well, some people say you've got the neatest kind of answer in your hands. That George Dorset would marry you tomorrow if you tell him all you know. But you don't seem to care for that particular form of getting even and taking a purely business view of the question. I think you're right. In a deal like that, nobody comes out with perfectly clean hands. And the only way for you to start fresh is to get Bertha Dorset to back you up instead of trying to fight her." As he pressed on, elucidating his idea with the directness of the man who has no doubts, she found herself held fast in the grasp of his argument by the mere cold strength of its presentation. And it was not the horror of the idea that held her spellbound. It was rather the subtle affinity to her own inmost cravings. He would marry her tomorrow if she could regain Bertha Dorset's friendship, and to induce the open resumption of that friendship and the tacit retraction of all that had caused its withdrawal, she only had to put to the lady the latent menace contained in the packet so miraculously delivered into her hands. Put by Rosedale, this understanding took on the harmless air of a mutual accommodation, like a transfer of property or a revision of boundary lines. Rosedale seemed to read in her silence not only a gradual acquiescence in his plan, but a dangerously far-reading perception of the chances it offered. For he broke out, "You see how simple it is, don't you? Well, don't be carried away by the idea that it's too simple. It's one thing to get Bertha Dorset into line, but you want us to keep her there. You can frighten her fast enough, but how are you going to keep her frightened? By showing her that you're as powerful as she is. All the letters in the world won't do that for you as you are now, but with a big backing behind you, you'll keep her just where you want to be. That's my share in the business. That's what I'm offering you. You can't put the thing through without me. In 6 months, you'd be back again among your old worries, or worse ones. And here I am, ready to lift you out of them tomorrow, if you say so." "Do you say so, Miss Lily?" he added, moving suddenly nearer. The words and the movement combined to startle Lily out of the state of trance-subservience into which she had insensibly slipped. Light comes in devious ways to the groping consciousness, and it came to her now through the disgusted perception that her would-be accomplice assumed, as a matter of course, the likelihood of her distrusting him, and perhaps trying to cheat him of his share of the spoils. This glimpse of his inner mind seemed to present the whole transaction in a new aspect, and she saw that the essential baseness of the act lay in its freedom from risk. She drew back, saying, "You are mistaken, quite mistaken, both in the facts and in what you infer from them." Rosedale stared a moment, puzzled. "Now what on earth does that mean? I thought we understood each other," he exclaimed. And to her murmur of, "We do now," he retorted with sudden violence, "I suppose it's because the letters are to him then. Well, I'll be damned if I see what thanks you've gotten from him."
After refusing Rosedale's proposition, Lily, increasingly concerned about her finances, takes a position as a social secretary to a vulgar newcomer. Selden visits Gertie, who wants to discuss Lily's situation.
Selden had lingered on through the dowdy animation of his cousin's tea hour, conscious of something in her eye which solicited a word apart. And as soon as the last visitor was gone, Gertie opened her cause by asking how lately he had seen Miss Bart. "I haven't seen her at all. I've perpetually missed seeing her since she came back." "That's all the more reason. She's been very unhappy. You know, people have been very unkind since Bertha Dorset quarreled with her." "Yes, I know," Selden assented curtly. "Yes, she's been abominably treated, but it's unfortunately the precise thing that a man who wants to show his sympathy can't say to her." His words caused Gertie a chill of disappointment. "There would be other ways of showing your sympathy," she suggested. Selden sat down beside her on the little sofa. "What are you thinking of, you incorrigible missionary?" Gertie's color rose. "I'm thinking of the fact that you and she used to be great friends, that she used to care immensely for what you thought of her, and that if she takes your staying away as a sign of what you think now, I can imagine it's adding a great deal to her unhappiness." "My dear child, don't add to it still more, at least to your conception of it, by attributing to her all sorts of susceptibilities of your own. Selden could not keep a note of dryness out of his voice, but he met Gertie's look of perplexity by saying more mildly, "But though you immensely exaggerate the importance of anything I could do for Miss Bart, you can't exaggerate my readiness to do it, if you ask me to. I do ask you then. I ask you because she once told me that you'd been a help to her, and because she needs help now as she has never needed it before. Now all the things she cared for have been taken from her, and the people who taught her to care for them have abandoned her too. And it seems to me that if someone could reach out a hand and show her the other side, show her how much is left in life and in herself." Gertie broke off. "I can't help her myself. She's passed out of my reach. I think she's afraid of being a burden to me." Selden had listened, with the concentrated look which his thin, dark face could assume when he wished to guard it against any involuntary change of expression. When his cousin ended, he said, as he rose to leave, "I'll do what you wish and not hold you responsible for my failure." Selden's avoidance of Miss Bart had not been as unintentional as he had allowed his cousin to think. At first, while the memory of their last hour in Monte Carlo still held the full heat of his indignation, he had anxiously watched for her return. But she had disappointed him by lingering in England, and when she finally reappeared, business had called him to the West, whence he came back to learn that she was starting for Alaska with the Gormers. This suddenly established intimacy effectually chilled his desire to see her. If, at a moment when her whole life seemed to be breaking up, she could cheerfully commit to its reconstruction with the Gormers, there was no reason why such accident should ever strike her as irreparable. Every step she took seemed to carry her farther from the region where, once or twice, he and she had met for an illumined moment. It was much simpler for him to judge Miss Bart by her habitual conduct than by the rare deviations from it, which had thrown her so disturbingly in his way. And every act of hers which made the recurrence of such deviations more unlikely confirmed the sense of relief with which he returned to the conventional view of her. But Gertie Farish's words had sufficed to make him see how impossible it was for him to live quietly with the thought of Lily Bart. To hear that she was in need of help was to be at once repossessed by that thought, and by the time he reached the street, he'd sufficiently convinced himself of the urgency of his cousin's appeal to turn his steps directly toward Lily's hotel. There his zeal met a check and the news that Miss Bart had moved away, but the clerk remembered that she left an address, for which he began to search. It was certainly strange that she should have taken this step without letting Gertie Farish know, and Selden waited with a vague sense of uneasiness. The process lasted long enough for uneasiness to turn to apprehension, but when a slip of paper was handed him, and he read, "Care of Mrs. Norma Hatch, Emporium Hotel," his apprehension passed into an incredulous stare, and this into the gesture of disgust with which he tore the paper in two and turned to walk quickly homeward.